last 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, if you're in a business, I mean, there's actually a ton of pretty big businesses in town and a pretty big, infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. And fly direct to San Francisco from our airports.
Yeah. And obviously Ohio State, man, is a freaking juggernaut. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Huge institution.
Although I would say, like inside it's more the kind of like large structure that quietly feasts on its own that necessarily is kind of expanding dynamically rolling around. But yeah.
Yeah, I think Chad Munitz is going to join. He's down in Cincinnati. He's a graduate of Ohio State. He should be getting on. But I was actually born in Detroit. I'm actually a Michigander, and you probably don't know the history of Toledo. Toledo should have been in Michigan.
Right. Border
war. And when Jackson was president, they made a deal. Michigan got the Upper Peninsula, and Ohio got Toledo.
Yeah, no, I have been informed about this kind of like strange chapter in American history from some of my students who are from the Toledo area.
Yeah. Because it was something about the southern boundary of Lake Erie, and they didn't survey it correctly. So if you look at the Ohio-Michigan border, or Ohio-Indiana border, it's not straight. But everybody else is bored. Jamie, who's not on camera, but he's from New Jersey. He doesn't understand the beauty of the Midwest, so he's missing out. So, guys, we'll give it a few more minutes, and then I'll just turn it over to you, and we'll have a good little chat.
Yeah, sounds great.
Thanks for joining us today, by the way. It's great.
Yeah,
I mean, this is fun for us. I'm actually heading down to Fort Bragg tomorrow with Tom to train some guys. So this is like a good warm up for us. Hopefully, we won't totally.
Well, we'll probably not be as good as students as your actual military. We'll try.
Actually,
Tom, is that where you're down at Fort Bragg?
Yeah, I'm in Fort Bragg.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty nice here. So I moved here over the summer from the DC area.
Okay.
Which, coming from DC to now, I live around Pinehurst.
Yeah, perfect.
Just a totally different feel to it. It's much more my speed. I don't have to deal with the Beltway traffic, so I'll take that. I just have to deal with the deer coming in all the time. But
I went to yeah, I went to business school at Carolina, so yeah, the gateway to the South. I don't know anybody who lives in North Carolina that doesn't like it. It's a nice part of the world, and Pinehurst is great. That part is great.
Yeah, I feel a little bit like a traitor because I don't really play golf, but maybe it's on the short list of things for me to do while I'm here.
I went to the U.S. Open. It was there, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, it's a really special place.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And if you like to golf, which most of my neighbors do, like there's few places that are as good of golf places in the country.
Yeah, it's like the cultural soul of golf.
All Tom really likes to do is jump out of planes, as I have basically, I was deeply traumatized a week or so ago because the Army posted this video of a guy jumping out of a plane and his chute failed. And he basically just like flew straight towards the ground. And then, about, I don't know, a few hundred feet before impact, Tom could say his secondary chute opened, thus, at the last moment saving his life. And I relayed this in extreme concern to Tom. That one of our parachutes had failed, at which point Tom was like, "Oh no, as long as the secondary works, I don't know what you're getting so upset about. That's a sign of success."
Yeah, he had the rest of his life to pull his reserve chute, and he successfully did that.
Well, with that, I think that's probably a good segue to creativity when plans fail. So, I'll just give you the rules of the road. We got a good audience. We got some of our friends from the UK. Good to see Carlo and Joe and Rob. And so we're just going to have a good little chat. I'm going to throw it over to you guys. It's very collegial. There's no PowerPoint. It's really designed to be almost like a fireside chat. You guys can throw out some ideas, and we'll just do a little Q&A, and we'll just go for 45 minutes. and have some fun. So unfortunately, or Greg Bunch, who connected us, won't be joining us today. Some of you guys might remember Greg did a call back in September of 2020, which is pretty wild. Studying entrepreneurship. He's a professor at University of Chicago, and he turned me on to Dr. Fletcher down there at Ohio State and the work that Tom's doing, Major Tom Gaines. And that's the connection. So without any further ado, guys, I'll turn it over to you. And yeah, any more stories about parachutes failing sounds great.
Well, I'll try to keep those at a minimum. So, if I don't know what to do with my hands, it's because, like, in the Army, if we don't have PowerPoint slides, it kind of feels like we're missing a little limb. So I'll do the best as I can, but it's like a crutch that's been taken away from me, but I think we'll be able to get through it. So first I want to just say thank you for taking the time and having us on so we can have this discussion. For me, it's incredibly rewarding, simply because I kind of live in a military echo chamber, right? We're a bunch of people who've been groomed to think like me over the last 5 to 25 years. Often end up sounding pretty homogenous. So anytime I get the opportunity to talk to people that have vastly different experiences, I jump at it, and I end up learning so much. So thank you guys for letting us be a part of this. So I think we wanted to just start out and kind of talk about like where I am and then how we connected with Angus. So just a brief military history lesson that I think most of you guys are tracking. But over the last 200 years or so, as like Western armies expanded exponentially with the amount of people that were in them, so we went from like small 50 to 100,000 soldier armies being massive to now we're talking 600,000 to millions, right? So Army leadership had to figure out ways to deal with that, right? So how do I field an army and then sustain an army of that size for a duration and still be effective? So the answer that they came up with, as the West is also going through this period of industrialization, is, hey, let's just use logic and apply logic and reasoning, and we'll just get this down to a science, right? So famously, the train timetables that the Germans had going into World War I. So everything was down to the cars and the squad. So the 8 to 10 men that were going to be on each of those railroad cars going to the front was in these timetables that the Germans had planned out, because they had to be that ruthlessly meticulous about it, right? In order for them to have a chance at being successful. And that worked fantastically. If war can be called fantastic, but it achieves the goal as intended, right? So that's how we learned to fight, and that's how we trained it basically became war by the numbers. So I have all of these different variables, and I can line them up, and I can bring my staff together, and we'll go through a rigid planning process and a way of making decisions that take all of the facts and then put them into a large decision matrix and just throw them all into the calculator and churn that thing. And a lot of heartache and coffee later, the answer gets spit out, and that becomes our plan, and that's how we go forward. And that's kind of how the conventional force works, and how America is able to accomplish some of its military objectives. Juxtaposed with that is kind of the way that the special operations forces end up being employed. So I've spent, of my 16 years in the Army, I've spent the last 7 in the special operations community. And unfortunately, what we found is that sort of rigid adherence to logic and reason and just working through these plans don't always work. Sometimes they work well, but the soft missions end up being those things that just don't fit the conventional force. For some reason, either we don't have the information, or we don't have the luxury of being able to just pile on all these sorts of resources to be able to go find answers that we need, right? So soft operations tend to be more delicate and where the rules don't necessarily apply. So if we talk about the science of war being those logic and rational plans, the art of war is what starts to really come out when you start talking about special operations. So what we've kind of tried to do before is we just say, hey, how good are you at sort of reacting to contact? And it just, we've treated it as this innate thing where you have folks that can do and folks that can't do. But as we step back and look, and like, well, we train everything else. I train, if you can't run when you come into the Army, I train you how to run. If you can't do push-ups, I train you how to do that. If you can't do logic and reasoning, I train you to do that. But then we were stopping when it came to that sort of art. So the creativity on the battlefield. And for some reason, we just weren't training that. It was just either you had it or you hadn't. So we started looking for ways to do that. And that's kind of how I ended up linking up with Angus, who was able to fill in some of those gaps, because he was coming from the kind of the other way, which is like, hey, I think this is how the brain works. Now let's see what we can do about training. So he and I linked up, and that kind of brought us to where we are now.
Yeah, so basically, I have a very unusual background. I spent most of my life in Hollywood, Silicon Valley, places like that. My background's in neuroscience. And the focus has always been on training creatives to get like just a little bit more creativity out of their brain. So you can think of it essentially as kind of working with Olympic athletes and just trying to get that extra tiny little bit of juice out. They said, we have this problem, which is we want to basically train up thousands and thousands of officers quickly and make them more creative. Can you come in and train them to be more creative? So I said, okay, sure, whatever, I'll come in and look at it. And the first thing I saw is that the Army is training people to be creative by using exactly the same science that's used in all the kind of top corporations in America, Google, big design schools up at Berkeley. It's all the same stuff. And what my research shows, and we'll talk about that hopefully over this call, is that the way we've been training creativity for the last 70 years is completely wrong. It doesn't work. The basis of it is something known as divergent thinking, which is a logical principle, actually comes out of the Air Force in the 1940s, and has since become the basis of design schools and whatnot. And Mark has asked me to give you guys 5 quick reasons for why design thinking doesn't work, why divergent thinking doesn't work. I'll throw them out real quick. The first is that we've been using it for years and years and years. We spent literally hundreds of billions of dollars on it in not just the military, but Google, anywhere you go. And it has yielded almost no downstream results in terms of actual innovation. We know that divergent thinking, so that's one. Number 2 is we know that divergent thinking is not the way that children are creative. Children do not employ the kind of logical techniques that we learn in design schools, and yet children are famously much more creative. AI, artificial intelligence. We can now program artificial intelligence to do divergent thinking. It has not created a computer that actually can generate anything original. If you look at what computers do when they're making art or writing, they're basically just doing kind of smudge work, where they just smudge together stuff that humans have previously created, but they're not being any more original. The fourth thing is that we know in humans that the ability to be creative is associated with your ability to spot anomalies, or what the military calls exceptional information, stuff that's weird in your environments. And computers and logics can't do that. When you put something that's weird into a logic processor, it just regresses it to a mean. It says, oh, that's a mistake. Let me put that back to my curve. And the final thing is that we know that creativity is increased by what's known as perspective taking, or seeing a problem from another perspective. That's something else you can't do logically, because logic implies that there's one master perspective, which is the right perspective for seeing everything. So basically what we've done in the military over the last few months is we've designed an entirely new curriculum, which we're now using to train thousands of officers, and which we're now moving into the special operations community with the help of Tom. We're probably going to go, we think, to DARPA to do it. And we have a fairly large article coming out in a couple of months in the New York Academy of Science, which kind of lays out this new approach to creativity, how it can be trained, and why it overturns everything we've been doing for the past 70 years. So that's the kind of quick survey. If you guys have questions about what it is that we're doing that's new, if you'd like any more on that or why the old thing didn't work, we'd be happy, Tom and I'd be happy to talk about it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I mean, I guess I'll get it going. Yeah, I love this topic. I think what you guys are doing is like cutting edge and logic, reason, AI, data. I mean, we're just bombarded by all these phrases. And there's also this other phrase where somebody says to you, "Oh, you're creative," which sometimes seems like an insult, or it's just like it's such an anomaly. Can you just talk about like if you've thought about this, like the culture of creativity, just in America in general, like what it means to be creative, and is there a stigma around it? Is it like you're an outlier? Can you just talk about that, and then we'll turn it over to the other folks on the call.
So first of all, yeah. So here's the thing about creativity: is creativity has historically been a synonym for weird, eccentric, different, outside the box. It's something that's actively discouraged in our school system. We know that at the age of 8, kids start becoming less creative as a result of the training that they receive in school. We also know that when you ask educators whether or not they want kids to be more creative, they all say yes. But then when you ask them about the skills that are associated with creativity, which are basically thinking differently, challenging authority, educators hate all those things and they drive them out. So absolutely. And most of America, I would say, is driven by this kind of weird paradox, which on the one hand is we claim that we're individual, we kind of revere people like Steve Jobs or whomever, who are these visionaries who start companies and so on and so forth. Yet on the other hand, we're obsessed with the idea of reason, rationality, logic, and all of those just head to the right answer, one right answer. And a big part of the reason that I get brought into places, whether it's Hollywood or wherever, is because creatives spend a lot of their time being scared. They don't want to take the risk. They have a gut instinct that something needs to change, or they want to do something. And then everyone around them freaks out because nobody else sees it. And a big part of being a creative is feeling like you can see the future. And why is that? Can you actually see the future? No, scientifically you can't. But when you are a real creative, you can make the future. Almost everything that's cool in our world right now has been invented by someone's imagination. They made it happen, and all of you, at some point in your life, when you're building your business, you made that business, you invented that business, you created that business, you made that happen. So as a creative, you can see a possible future that nobody else sees. And so then everybody usually comes around and says, we need the data, we need the proof, that's a risk, that's making me uncomfortable. And particularly if you're in a kind of classic corporate structure, or if you're, middle management in the US Army, that immediately gets crushed out.
Yeah, so and the Army kind of mimics that same experience, right? Where it's almost considered the art is almost considered of less importance than the science, right? Where do the science, all the numbers add up, and you will come up with the best answer to whatever tactical problem that you face. But at the same time, when you actually go out and do these things, that creativity ends up being lauded. So we end up almost in garrison life, downplaying creativity. But then once we get into the field, we realize again, we remember how important it is. And there's a famous quote that the Soviets have during the Cold War. That was basically the problem with American doctrine and studying American doctrine is that the Americans famously don't pay any attention to it when it actually comes time to fighting, right? So we have these things and we have all these rules, and you better follow the rules. And we don't want any outliers or creatives, but we're sure glad you're there when we need you. So it's kind of this love-hate relationship on creativity, especially because it's almost seen more like the softer side as opposed to like the hard side of the science of military theory.
Yeah, and if you want, I can talk. I'm doing a bunch of stuff now with some hedge funds I can talk about. There's a lot of interesting. So here's the basic kind of thing, going back to what Tom was saying. You want rules in any situation which is stable and knowable. So anytime you're in a stable situation where you have a lot of data, great, follow it. You don't, however, the moment things turn volatile or uncertain, the moment you're in a situation where the future is no longer predictable, that's where you need to back out of logic, that's where you need to back out of rules, and that's where you need to actively engage creativity. And so in the case of the hedge funds, the moment that the market is stable and predictable, great, we have all these algorithms. We just use our algorithms. Our algorithms tell us what stocks to buy, and we just crush everyone in the market. What's happening now? We're entering a moment of unprecedented global volatility produced by an enormous number of things. Also, I would say the last 20 or 30 years really have been a sort of manufactured stability, produced by the Fed and other kinds of forces, and now we're kind of walking off that cliff. Well, what do you do? What do you do when the computer is basically telling you stuff that you know is wrong because the computer is living in yesterday, because all the data can predict is what happened 15 minutes ago? So that's the purpose of the creativity, and that's the reason that it's needed in war or in any volatile situation. Once you get out of these kinds of curated environments, which we humans like to create for ourselves and pretend are our reality.
Love it. Hey, Joe, go ahead.
Evening, gents. Nice to meet you. Thank you for this. This is fascinating. Can you guys talk a little bit about scale? At the beginning there, Tom, you talked about kind of large, kind of what I'm assuming was sort of ground armies having this kind of rigid planning process, and then special ops, which I'm assuming is much smaller, kind of numbers of people involved, and then how that might apply for us kind of in a business context. Is this, when I think about the big organizations that I've worked with, that kind of rigid planning process almost feels necessary. Like, how much creativity can you have at how big can you get with the creativity before it becomes too messy to be practical?
So let me answer that question aggressively. You can't answer these questions from within the organization. That's a losing situation. You can't say from within the organization, how creative can I afford to be? You have to say, what is my environment forcing me to do? We work with a lot of very, very large, multi-billion-dollar kind of top 50 companies, like State Farm, pretty famously, is on record as working with us, And when you're a big company, what you basically try and do is you try and dominate your operational space, so you don't have to be creative, because you're so big that you can basically control the ecosystem. And sure, in that situation, you want to have a kind of R&D department, which is coming up with cool ideas, but overall you want the situation to be stable. However, even State Farm is experiencing unprecedented turmoil at the moment. I mean, these big companies. And what you have to do is you have to be able to build that agility into the company. And the best way to do that is not to have a tiny group of executives who are all trying to think and figure it out. The best way to do that is to spread the creativity out over the entire organization, encourage small pilot projects, empower individuals to take risks that can be managed, and sort of grow your organization in that more organic way, as opposed to kind of freaking out that you're gonna kind of lose control of the battleship and crash it into an island. Does that make sense? It's really the situation that dictates, and I think you have to go into companies and be honest with them and say, look, this isn't about what you want, this is about what the situation requires.
Yeah, and so if we're talking large scale conflict, I don't want my logistician to just be out there getting creative with where he's going to refuel like my armored divisions, right? I want him to stick to the playbook most of the time. But like Angus is talking about, I want him to know when that playbook is starting to break down, and for him to have the latitude to be able to take disciplined initiative to be a little bit creative with how he's doing that resupply. Well, maybe this valley isn't good. Maybe I need to go just a little bit left or right because of reasons, right? So it's not necessarily about them getting super creative, but finding ways that you can give them like left and right limits on, hey, this is where I need you to be the voice of creativity on the ground to deal with situations as they come up, right? And it's not necessarily about them getting the perfect answer. It's just about getting them a little bit further down the road, retaining that initiative and getting the mission done and in a way that is successful, even if it's not like the optimum way if we were to spend, you know, hundreds of hours in a lab coming up with whatever the optimal position would be.
You also have to remember that your operational space includes all your competitors. And the more predictable you are, the more you're allowing them to anticipate you, the more you're allowing them to destroy you. And you know, that's a more obvious reality in the case of the military. I mean, pretty famously during the Vietnam War, the American Navy was having all its planes shot down because the Viet Cong had read the flight books and the flight training, and they knew that Americans always broke left when one thing happened and broke right when another thing happened, and so they would just sit and just wait for that to happen. But the same thing will happen in a business situation as well. When you become predictable, you know, the other people who are trying to move into the space know immediately where your vulnerabilities are, and that's why it's always good to kind of delegate and allow for autonomy and experiment to the degree that the situation permits, as Tom is saying.
Hey, Antoine, go ahead.
Hey, all. Thanks for allowing me to be creative and cook my lunch while in the beginning of the call. But I'm going to play with some messy semantics. I play in the design space with both federal and state folks, and creativity. I hear you both saying, you know, creativity is the mark, but I don't think you're actually talking about creativity as much as you're talking about captive disruption. And they sound exactly the same. They almost look the same, but captive disruption is the ability to let somebody run off of the gate, if you will, or be outside of the box, but not be so far outside of the box that it actually compromises the integrity of whatever the business operations are doing, or in military case, whatever the military opt is. It's a phrasing that, if you will, that's adjacent. That seems adjacent to Clayton Christensen's you know, theory of disruption or disruptive action. And it seems that from my experience, the companies that seem to do this best, that have this captive disruption, those are the ones that are able to best kind of navigate. You know, when you allow for this space, hey, in this pocket over here, you've got Google, which are 20% time. You know, you've got this ability over here to go and do something that's off gate, outside of the bounds, but it's within some kind of measured space. There is some ROI that's around that. I'm not just letting you go off of the range to go off of the range. An article earlier this week with Apple, you know, hey, we got all of our 20,000 designers sitting in Apple Park, but you know, if you can't build something, then you can't design something. You know, you only have so much range in which you can go to. And so hence my question to you all is it really creativity? You know, because creativity is in a sense almost making something out of nothing or remixing the former idea, or is it really more captive disruption? Where you're saying, you know what, we need to disrupt ourselves. We need to have this ability to see outside of the box, but we really can't untether you from the mothership. We can't untether you from the umbilical cord. Is that kind of more?
Well, so yes and no. So first of all, you're absolutely correct. And when we talk about implementing creativity in terms of organizations, you absolutely need what you're talking about in terms of captive disruption. But what we're talking about is how you train individuals in your organization and how you train yourself to be more creative.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're talking about is the neuroscience behind how you expand your own ability to come up with unprecedented answers to unprecedented problems. Once you have kind of trained your brain, you train that muscle, you can then take it into the organizational space and say, is it legit to try this? Is this going outside our bounds? Will this even work? I mean, let alone whether, you know, so everything you're saying is 100% correct, but basically what we're trying to talk about is that there are a lot of methods just to go into individual employees or members of your organization or even your own brain and just grow that muscle and make it work a lot better. Again, with the Olympic athlete example, you know, even if you're already 98% performance, you can still get another percent out of that usually. And you know, if you've got employees that are operating at 15%, then there's a ton of easy pickup.
Got you. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, getting folks on the Fed side to just use a whiteboard was creative disruption on our a digital whiteboard, Zoom times. You know, digital that was creative disruption. You know, I feel like you're playing on your computer. No, you're not playing on a computer. You are leveraging spatial awareness in a different mindset, and you know, a little bit of that tends to go a long way. Do you find then that organizations are more adept to take those challenges, to think, if you will, outside of their norm, to stretch themselves in that wise?
So I don't know. I mean, Tom, you can probably answer this a little bit too. But going back to what I said to Joe, organizations, particularly large ones, will only move out of their comfort zone when they have to. But what we're starting to see is a lot of those organizations are realizing that they have to, and they don't know how to. And that's really the space where we come in. I don't want to go into an organization and spend a lot of time trying to convince them to be creative. That's a waste of my time. That's a waste of their time. It's just a waste of time. What I want to do is I want to come to an organization that's like, we are breaking. We are having problems. We are seeing that there's a real issue here. How do we fix that? And then the number one thing I say in terms of fixing that is not recruit a whole bunch of new people, but look at the people you've already got, figure out how to train them up and empower them and get the most out of them, and then try to see what that works. And turning it over to Tom now, I mean, that is kind of how the Army has always operated. The Army doesn't have the opportunity just to go out and just like hire a bunch of people. It's like, this is your squad.
Right, exactly, right. So, going back to the soft world, we end up realizing that traditional methods just don't fit, right? So we put everything into our operational calculator, and we're returning results that are unexpected. So clearly, somewhere in our algorithm is broken. So we have to do something. And soft is a little bit quicker to pivot, just because of the nature of the people that come in. They're a little bit more senior, and other reasons. So they're just better at being like, oh, okay, this isn't working, let's try something else, right? So that's a little bit of the organizational culture is already built like that. So that's something that you can work towards, is building an organizational culture that does that. So as a commander, right, my whole purpose in life is, besides getting a mission, is to give my people the time and resources to be able to actually accomplish that mission, right? So from a creativity perspective, it's, hey, how can I arm them with the tools to do that, and then get them the resources and the time and like the intellectual safety to be able to actually play in that space within the bounds of the commander's intent that I give them. Like, hey, here's the left and right limits. We still need to accomplish this, but man, give me what you got, right? So if as the commander, if I've made that be known and set the condition and the culture of the organization, going back to your boundaries, like that's where the magic happens, right? It's not necessarily when they're these huge outliers, but there's so much money that can be made, figuratively and literally in some cases, from just unleashing the team you have, giving them, loosening the reins a little bit and just letting them run.
Hey, Carlo, go ahead, buddy.
Hey guys, sorry, I'm got slightly strange camera position here. I'm on a phone locked away. Thanks for your time tonight, guys. I'm really interested in this subject, and I'd be interested in your views. My hunch is that, certainly from my own experience, that the most creative output comes from usually from a place of discomfort. And I'm really intrigued, particularly by the creativity in the arts world and also in sport. And I'm always reminded of David Bowie's fantastic idea he gave in an interview many years ago. He was asked about advice to young kids in terms of creativity, and he said something along the lines of, if you feel safe in the area you're working in, you're not working in the right area for creativity. Always go a little bit further into the water until you feel like your feet aren't touching the bottom. And when they're not touching the bottom, that's when you're in a place, ready for real creativity. I think it would be difficult, whether or not you're into Bowie, I think it would be very difficult to argue that he wasn't one of the most creative people, certainly in my lifetime. And I'm just interested in whether or not, and we see it in sport as well, I think, whether or not you feel that discomfort, not necessarily fear, but discomfort's a really important ingredient of true creativity. And that's why we so often don't see it in business, because people are shit scared of of actually being in a place of discomfort.
Yeah, so let me just talk very briefly about the biological origins of creativity. Basically, creativity originated in your brain because hundreds of thousands of years ago, the environment was highly volatile. And we always had to keep coming up with new ways to survive and to exploit opportunities. So basically, all around us were emerging threats and emerging prospects. And our brain had to react fast to come up with new plans, new strategies for taking advantage of that. And what that means is that the creativity in our brain fundamentally is actually activated by volatility and chaos, because that turns on those primordial zones in our brain. And it says, you have to be creative. This is not a choice. You are going to die if you don't figure out a new tool or to get to take advantage of this opportunity, or a new way to handle this predator. And what has happened in the modern world is we've created these safe spaces where we never have that kind of primal collision until it is actually so late that we have forgotten how to activate those parts of our brain. And then we just go into fight or flight. We just run. That's our approach in the modern world. And so a big part of what you have to do as a creative is you have to walk out of that safe zone constantly and into that kind of primordial stew to start activating those deep regions of your brain. So you're 100% right about that. That's where the discomfort comes from. It's about basically onboarding all the stuff that your brain naturally has, but we have created this kind of whitewashed modern world to escape from.
Yeah.
So
Thanks, Angus.
I think another part of it is like we've gotten so good at like the meaty center of so many things that it's kind of become a little bit stale and boring. So one of the reasons that people are attracted to like special operations away from like the conventional force is they're looking for something more, because they're just naturally drawn to wanting to be uncomfortable. So they're tired of being able to just look at problems that have solutions if you just do work, and they're looking to be in those spaces that are uncomfortable. And one of the funny things is if you look at folks in the special operations community, they almost have hobbies that for some reason involve a lot of personal discomfort and maybe risk. So there's a lot of endurance athletes, a lot of people who do a lot of skydiving on the weekend or other adrenaline sports. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're just people that like to be on the fringe of things where things don't necessarily make sense. And it just allows their brain to constantly be in that position where, hey, maybe there's new things that I can learn here, and not everything has been worked out and is sterile.
Yeah. And just a big part of the training is just that. Make everyone special forces. Make everyone go outside their comfort zone. Make everyone take what feels like a risk. And then the more you keep pushing into that risk zone, the more you kind of activate these powers in your brain. So it's the exact opposite of, I mean, we talk a lot nowadays about mindfulness, serenity, retreats, safe spaces, all these kinds of things. And there can be value in those things for certain reasons if you're burned out or whatever. But if you actually want to go in the other direction and make yourself like special forces, you have to put yourself in a position where you do feel in danger.
Yeah. It's hormesis, isn't it? You know, the idea that we grow when we're stressed.
Yes, exactly. Yes, because we have to grow. We have to grow. Our biology basically evolved when we're not in danger, hibernate, and when you are, attack, Yeah. And that's why you have to put yourself under a certain degree of stress all the time if you want to grow to your fullest.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, Bob Brown.
Hey, Mark.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. So about a year ago, I got asked by a Fortune 500 size company to enter a partnership with them to create a bunch of industrial robotics, which we've done for about 20 years. And I'd say in that 20 years, we probably have somewhere around like 500 patentable ideas. So we run, I feel like, a very creative, small company here. And one of the CEO of that company said, it's one of the reasons I want to do this partnership with you is I want to return creativity into my company. And I was like, yeah, our 25 people are really going to turn your 20,000 people into, a bunch of real creative people overnight. Well, one of my first pieces of advice that I gave them, and it sounds to me like I'm completely wrong based on what y'all just said, is I told them if they want creativity, they had to quit punishing failure. And I don't know how to square that, because that's kind of how I felt like we've been creative here, is to not really, it's not a punishable offense to have tried and failed.
Well, you're right. And it is consistent. So let me say a couple of things on that point. So first of all, when we talk about putting you into a space where you're uncomfortable, you're making yourself uncomfortable. It's not the organization making you uncomfortable. When the organization starts to make you uncomfortable, it becomes overwhelming and you want to back out of the space and not do anything and take any risks. We have to empower people with their own discomfort is the first thing. The second thing is the number one thing that we find that stops people from being creative is their own hopes and fears. So basically, non-creative people are constantly interpreting everything in the world to fit what they're afraid is true or what they hope is true. Whereas creative people are able to see all the bandwidth in between. You're able to see all the possibilities in between. And so a huge part of being a creative person is being able to step outside your own hopes and fears. To step outside, to exit your own perspective, basically. And most creatives almost have this almost like godlike view at times where they can just kind of see broadly, and ideas start to come into their head, they don't even know where. If you punish failure, it makes people focus on their own ego, their own individual self. It breaks up the team, and it also causes them to have fear. And then by increasing the fear, it reduces the creativity. So you're 100% right. What you have to do is you have to not punish failure, but encourage risk. Not punish failure, but encourage risk. That's the duality. And so you have to create a safe space insofar as the ultimate consequence, being fired isn't there, but you have to make people realize I'm out of my competence zone. I'm out of my comfort zone. I don't know what's going on here. And then you're like, yes, keep going. Keep going out of your comfort zone. Keep going out of your competency zone. So anyway, Bob, it sounds to me you did everything right. And anyway, you're running a successsual business. And my general piece of advice to anyone running a successful business is just keep running your business the way you're running it. I mean, you know what you're doing,
Thank you. I think that was a good distinction. That's kind of how I looked at it. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, good guy to know, Brendan Kornacki.
Thanks so much, guys. I think this is very interesting. That I love what Mark was saying before, because sometimes people treat creativity like it's a superpower, and they try to put you on an island, and they're like, "Well, you're creative. You should know what to do." And I'm like, I own a camera. That doesn't mean I'm a fucking wizard, but But do you think that there's an advantage sometimes to almost trying to work, I guess, steps for improvisation or creativity within systems where sometimes this buffering of a little bit of rigidity, but a little bit of room for, like I said, improvisation sometimes helps to cultivate that within organizations? Because I think sometimes in the TV making world, which is my world, that's what it is sometimes, we have to rely on systems. We have to know some of that, step A and step D, but I don't care what happens in the middle sometimes. I don't care how somebody wants to capture a certain thing as long as we get to our end goal.
Yeah, well, Brendan, that's where I started. I mean, I started out working in Hollywood, and I agree with you completely. I mean, basically what you're saying is that if you have no structure at all or no boundaries, that doesn't actually create creativity. And the reason for that is there's not any obvious problem to be solved or negotiated. Creativity is a response to a specific boundary or border that you're trying to get over, or a task you're trying to do, or a specific opportunity that you see. If you're just released in the middle of the ocean, it's just like, what? So absolutely. The key is to figure out the right balance between the structure and the play in between. It's the sandbox, right? You want the sandbox defined, but you want enough sand in between. Does that sound right to you, Tom?
Yeah. So I think one of the keys for the military is to standardize absolutely everything that can be standardized, right? So I am making all of those things as mentally and resource inexpensive as possible, right? Because then I can focus on those things that are not able to be standardized, right? So I basically just taken all of my tasks and reduced some of them to things that are just on autopilot, and I can either automate them through AI and let AI do what it does best and just churn that out, or I can just focus on those a little bit so that I can spend as much time or as much of my people's time and effort on those things which really require a lot of focus and attention, right? So you're operating within this framework, and you're maximizing the time that they're able to look at the fringes and say, all right, now we can really start to get at the business of trying to push these out and really push the boundaries of where we're trying to go with our endeavors.
Well, and in the military too, they want to standardize things, but it does come down to that problem solving when shit hits the fan, right? Because having just rewatched Zero Dark 30, like the Bin Laden mission was everything was planned, and then we crashed the damn helicopter and we had to go completely off hook, right? So
right. But if I am as a leader, if I am going through all of these checklists and I'm too busy worried about the number of socks that are in one of my soldiers' rucksacks, or hey, where on your kit are your extra radio batteries? If I'm looking at that, what am I not looking at? I'm not looking at the bigger picture, and I'm not looking at what are those things in the environment or changes, or hey, is there something going on with that helicopter and I can detect it early so I can start to go through some of my mitigating procedures and some branch and sequel plans to get things rolling. So automate the things that can be automated so I can be looking out for that exceptional information about what doesn't fit into the standard mathematical equation, so I can be preemptive and creative about how I find solutions for it.
Would you guys be able to go a little bit into, some of the, I'm like you just described, Thomas, I'm a very automated person. There are 2 of 4 tablets next to me right now. I'm extremely automated. But one of the challenges that I had, and this is, I had explained to somebody that it's not generational, but it really is. It's a mental hurdle that some folks have, is that some people have their own sense-making frameworks. They figured out how to develop these things over time, and they can translate those to other folks. When you get into these organizations, or you're sitting with different teams, and you're trying to help them, if you will, kind of create their own sense-making framework so they can get to that point of having things automated. Can you talk a little bit about some of that kind of challenge? Is it a challenge? Is it not a challenge? It's and on my end, I found it enough of a challenge with designers that you develop a few things for designers so that you don't have to think about some things anymore, and you develop things for developers because designers don't think anymore, and you go from that route. But can you guys speak a little bit to that part?
Yeah. So I think one of the key things is that people are super uncomfortable relying on systems and processes that they don't understand, right? In the military, so if you think about, like, people rightly get really uncomfortable with the idea of AI and like having autonomous weapon systems where we're just like, okay, we're gonna trust the AI to know when to shoot or don't shoot, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be like to that extreme, but if I don't know what's going on in the black box and I just see an input and an output, I don't necessarily trust it. So I'm always going to kind of second guess and maybe be a little bit hesitant to use it. So I think just like on a human team, I have to learn how to trust the people to my left and the right through repetitions and getting to know them and how they tick. The same thing works for automation. If I kind of know a little bit about what's going on under the hood, like I start to trust my computer teammate a little bit more, and I'm willing to let them take over some of those tasks without like trying to micromanage them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and also a lot of this is you have to put the organization in a critical situation. You have to push them to a break point so they start to realize why those tools matter and why their behaviors need to change. So if you just come in somewhere and you start handing them a bunch of tools, no one's ever going to use them, even if there's the best tools in the world. You have to put them in a situation where they start to realize, oh my God, if I don't use that tool, this is going to all fall apart. And the number one way I think to do that with any organization, and I'm sure you feel the same way, you should just start by asking, what problems are you having? And then you start to lean into that problem and accelerate that problem as it starts to pull everything apart. And you can start to see everyone panic around you. And then once you've got that to like maximum panic, you pull out the tool. And you're like, boom, tool, solves problem, no panic, you know? And so the way in which you get them to buy in, I think, is emotionally, not just intellectually, is really a huge key. And it's just really important to remember, too, that creativity is as much an emotional thing as it is an intellectual thing. Creativity is supported by optimism, and it's driven by a sense of crisis and need and urgency. And that's why you want to be able to kind of engage people in those emotional states when you walk into an organization and create that immediate mood and atmosphere to then kind of facilitate the uptake.
Good, makes sense.
Well, guys, that was great. I want to be mindful of everybody's time and be respectful. Agnes and Tom, thank you so much for sharing this, your expertise. Also, thanks for your work on the front lines, keeping us safe, and working with some super brave and interesting folks. If people want to reach out to you, can I share your email? That's cool, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
All right, cool. And then this is a little book here by Agnes, which is great. It's also got some great exercises in it, and is a field guide. And when your new paper comes out, I'd love to share it with the crew. And thanks again for making the time. This was really great. I feel more creative than ever, which is unstoppable.
Mark, will you share his email? Will you share the name of the book and all that?
Yeah, for sure. I'll link it in there, and we'll send out a link to this call, and we'll keep this conversation going. Go ahead.
That book is the book we did for the Army, so you got to read it from the perspective of the Army. The Army just put it on Kindle because it was easier to disseminate to people that way.
No, it's great, but the exercises in there, and there's little stories, and it's a really good piece of work.
Awesome, guys. Well, look, enjoy, go create, and we'll hopefully talk to some of you soon.
Good to see everybody. Have a great holiday, and be creative.
Happy Christmas.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Ciao. See you soon.